What's up, guys? Had to do that, obviously. Well, it's Tuesday. It's March 17th. It's St. Patrick's Day. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to see my St. Patrick's Day outfit that I wear every year with my green blazer and my green suspenders, but you can imagine what it would look like. Anyway, hopefully you guys had a nice little adjustment so far yesterday. I know we didn't conference, and some of you guys were asking about conferencing in the email. I tried to lay it out for you as best as I could, but maybe I didn't do a good enough job. So we're going to conference. If you're watching this on Monday night, we're going to conference tomorrow. If you're in first period, our conference will start at 8:50. If you are in second period, our conference will start at 9:35. All right, some of you guys had questions earlier on Monday morning about conferencing, and I don't know if I made it clear enough for you. So again, if you're watching this on Monday night, that's what times you guys can log in tomorrow. If you're watching this on Tuesday morning, again, first period 8:50 a.m. and second period 9:35 a.m. Just make sure you guys are logged into the conference. It'll be active, so if you have any questions about anything, just shoot me an email, but hopefully it's pretty self-explanatory. And again, make sure you click that link with that video that I had sent you if you were unsure of how the conferencing works. That will log you into it relatively easily. It's not that difficult. Just make sure you're doing it in the Safari, all right? It's not going to work in the app, so you have to use either your computer. You can do it on your iPad. Just make sure you're logged into the website as opposed to the app, all right? So let's move on where we left off. I was introducing to you guys yesterday a lot of isms, right? We were talking about totalitarianism. We were talking about how under the umbrella of totalitarianism, you had all these different things like Nazism, you had communism we had mentioned into the Soviet Union. We had militarism under Japan, which we're going to pick off in a second. And then we also had fascism under Italy. All right, so I want to start real quick today with this particular slide. This is our next slide that we're going to start with today. So the Japanese, right? Militarism was their big thing that they were doing leading into the 1940s. Now, Japanese militarists, these people who were in the army, they were seizing and trying to expand parts of Asia, in particular China. So Manchuria, which you're going to see on the map in a second on the next slide, is located in northeastern China. It's this large area in the northern region of China. And that's where the Japanese army, really without the consent of the Japanese government, are going to march into, and they're going to seize total control of a lot of these different areas. Now, one of the most major cities in this region is called Nanjing. And the city of Nanjing is going to be the site of where there is a massive humanitarian crisis. The military is not only taking territory, particularly that city, but they're massacring hundreds of thousands of people. And this is called actually the Massacre of Nanjing, or the Nanjing Massacre, where 250,000 people, try to wrap your brain around that number, 250, it's 250,000 people, are going to be massacred at the hands of the Japanese army in their brutal march towards increasing their resources and increasing their territory. So that's one thing I wanted to point out to you guys. They treated the Chinese brutally, as it says on the slide here, but you have to really kind of wrap your brain around how many people that actually is as far as the brutal treatment under the hands of the Japanese military, again, overseen by the Emperor Hirohito. All right, so that's one quick example of what the Japanese did right away. And now moving into another territory of the world, which is in Africa. This was led by the Italians. Now, under Benito Mussolini, Italy is going to invade Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a country in Africa. Now, your question might be, why in the world would Italy care about a country in Africa? Like, why not focus on Europe or other countries that might be a direct threat to them? Well, there's a little history here that I wanted to share with you, which is why Ethiopia was a target right from the get-go. So Italy invaded Ethiopia to really avenge a situation that happened back in 1896. Now, in 1896, so again, this is almost 50 years earlier, roughly, Italy tried to colonize the territory of Ethiopia in Africa, but the Ethiopians at the time, in 1896, were able to protect themselves and really defend themselves from the incoming invasion of the Italians. And that was kind of seen as a very embarrassing loss for the Italians. So now that Italy is built up, they're under the rule of Mussolini, they have a relatively strong military comparatively to what they did at the time. They are going to go back to Ethiopia and really take control of this territory relatively easily. The Ethiopians are outdated. They're still on horseback. They're using bows and arrows and spears and things of that nature. And obviously the Italians are much more modernized in their weapons. So it's really not a difficult situation for Mussolini's army to march into this area and kind of avenge the loss of what happened back in 1896. It was a chance to boost the nationality of the Italians, the nationalism, the really strong pride they have in their country. That was kind of an opportunity that Mussolini wanted to achieve, and he definitely grasped that and took control of that. Now, the question also might be for yourself, what about the League of Nations, right? Isn't the League of Nations this international organization to promote peace and prevent another world war? What are they doing? Like, aren't they supposed to be stepping in at this situation here and try to prevent something from happening? Well, technically they are. They did do an investigation, the League of Nations did. They did an investigation into this. They condemned not only the Japanese for doing what they did to the Chinese, of course, but also they condemned Italy in their particular motives to try to invade Ethiopia. But unfortunately, with how weak the League of Nations was, they did not have any formidable response to this. They basically just slapped them on the wrist and say, don't do that, we disagree with this, and didn't have any plan moving forward. So the League of Nations really failed in trying to protect these countries that are inferior in this case. And Britain and France did not do anything either, because they were more concerned about what they were worried about, or at least what they were going to do to protect themselves against, let's say, an incoming invasion from the Nazis or maybe the Soviet Union, whatever the case may be, right? So they were more focused on themselves, and unfortunately, a place like Ethiopia, a place like northeastern China, they were going to be very susceptible to an attack like this. All right, let me just show you the map on the next slide to give you an idea as far as Japan goes and where they're trying to expand their influence into. So on this slide, on the map it says Manchukuo. Manchukuo is Manchuria. Manchukuo is another name for Manchuria. So you see China right in the center, relatively in the center. And in the northeastern part, as I had pointed out, that's where Manchuria is. And like I said on the map, it's Manchukuo. So the lighter pink sections are areas that Japan had, and you see the dates there, that they had kind of expand their sphere of influence, if you will, into. And Manchukuo was going to be targeted and victim to that area in 1931. So again, getting into the time period which inevitably leads us into World War II. All right, let's go to the next slide and talk about Hitler once again. He's going to be the main focus as far as some of this material at this point. All right, so the German aggression. We just talked about Italian aggression. We just talked about Japanese aggression. Now, what is Hitler going to do? Now, Hitler starts building up his army, and that's with the German army. And what's interesting about this, that's illegal to do that, right? The Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I, Germany was definitely the culprit of the scapegoat of that war. Remember, they had to pay reparations back. They had to take blame for what happened during the war. They also weren't allowed to use their U-boats, and they were supposed to decrease the size of their military. Now, that was back in 1919 and 1920. Now we're in the 1930s. This is over a decade later, and Hitler is now rebuilding up the German military to the point where they're going to be respectable. And they actually do become relatively strong. And a lot of that has to do with industrialization and modernization of weapons, and certainly the influence that Hitler has. We talked about yesterday how he was such a good oratory speaker. He was a good orator, and he was also a very, very energetic person as well. So people kind of were drawn to him, especially what the message was, to get Germany back on the map to be this massive power. So by building up the German military, that actually was illegal under the Treaty of Versailles. That was the treaty that ended World War I, but obviously he didn't care that it was illegal, and certainly no one was going to stop him at this time, it seemed like. So Germany is going to go just south and occupy the area of Austria. Now on the next map, on the next slide, you're going to see this. Austria is just south of Germany. It borders Germany, actually. So German armies are going to occupy Austria, and nobody stops him. So why wouldn't Hitler continue his march throughout Europe and try to gain other territories under his control? So the next stop that he's going to plan to do is go east from Austria. And again, on the next map, you're going to hopefully make this a little bit more clear yourself. I know some of you don't really know where these countries are on the map. If you do, you're familiar with what I'm talking about. If not, the next map will clear things up for you. But just follow me along for here for now. So after Austria is taken over and occupied by the Nazis, he's going to start threatening the territory right next door, which is Czechoslovakia. So this is, of course, what the Europeans don't want to see. They don't want Hitler marching all throughout Europe and doing whatever he wants to do. So France and Britain, the two leaders of Europe, they want to call a meeting in Germany to talk to Hitler. How can we put the pause button here on Hitler marching all throughout Europe? Now, Czechoslovakia is interesting because the western part of Czechoslovakia is kind of tucked inside of where Austria and Germany are. And actually, that little territory, the western part of Czechoslovakia, was called Sudetenland. Now, Sudetenland was very, very German. There were people who were most people in the western part of Czechoslovakia were German-speaking. Again, that territory was called Sudetenland. They were mostly German-speaking. They had a German culture. They essentially were German, and they were living in the western part of Czechoslovakia. So it kind of made sense if Hitler wanted to kind of take this territory and make it part of his building of an empire that he's creating. It might make sense for this territory to come under his control. However, if you start letting him take other territories, what's going to stop him from keep going? So France and Britain are going to sit down, and they're going to negotiate a particular type of agreement here. So the prime minister of England at the time is Neville Chamberlain. This is prior to Winston Churchill. So you might know Winston Churchill, his name. We're going to see him after this. So at the time, early before even World War II breaks out, Neville Chamberlain is the British Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister of France is Edouard Daladier. Daladier is how you say his name, Daladier. All right, so Daladier, the Prime Minister of France, and Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of England, are going to sit down in Munich. Now, Munich is a relatively popular city in Germany. Today, it's actually the third largest populated city in Germany. So it's a very important place in the history of Germany and still is to this day. So France and Britain and Germany, put this kind of in your minds. They're going to sit down in Munich, in Germany, to negotiate some sort of agreement with Hitler, so that way he maybe stops expanding. So Britain and France are going to agree to let Germany, you want to take the western part of Czechoslovakia, which is called Sudetenland, fine, you can take that, but you can't go any further. All right, and Hitler promises, again, he's made many promises that, of course, he's going to break, and this is one of them. Hitler promises, all right, I will not expand any further. If you give me Sudetenland, I have Austria under my control, I have Germany. Give me all those territories, I'll be happy with it. So Neville Chamberlain feels like they just had a huge victory here. We just appeased Hitler. He's not going to expand any further. He promised us. And he goes back to England and celebrates. And he's basically marching himself around England and all throughout Europe, really, trying to make a case that you can negotiate with Hitler. They were able to do that. It's a huge victory for not only Britain, but for the rest of Europe. Well, not so fast. 6 months later, Hitler violates this pact right away, and he takes all of the rest of Czechoslovakia. So, again, we're going to see this time and time again. Hitler just kind of plays with the minds of a lot of these leaders, and this is a perfect example of that. So the Munich Pact, just in summary, the Munich Pact was an agreement between Britain, France, and Germany saying Hitler can have the western part of Czechoslovakia called Sudetenland, as long as he promises not to advance any further throughout Europe. He promises it. They leave the agreement with that particular agreement in mind. And this conference is ultimately going to be shot down 6 months later because Hitler violates it and takes the rest of Czechoslovakia. So again, it's going to be a problem moving forward. Here's a quick map as I was talking to you guys about. So you see Germany right in the middle. It's the darker shaded area of the purple section. The lighter shaded area is Austria to the south, and that's the territory he takes, as it says here, in March of 1938. And then Czechoslovakia. Again, the western part of Czechoslovakia is another light purple shaded area. That's called Sudetenland, and you can see how it's kind of tucked inside of where the natural boundary of Germany and Austria is. So again, that was made up of areas of very German-speaking people, very German cultural people. That's what Hitler wanted, but again, 6 months later, he takes the rest of Czechoslovakia, and really, it's just a clear march after that. Again, we'll refer back to this map in a day or two, but just so you see where we're talking about right now, that's more or less the area we're talking about at this point. Okay, so what's America doing at this point? Because obviously we would want to do our best, you would think, to try to prevent something like this from happening. Well, unfortunately for the rest of the world, America is taking a much more isolationist approach. We have seen this many times in the past. Isolationism is something that if you go all the way back to George Washington's presidency, he had warned us about getting involved in foreign affairs, and we've brought this point up several times in the past. And once again, we're going to try to enact that policy. So Americans are going to attempt isolationism, and Congress is going to do their best to make sure that FDR, who's the president, is going to really be put in a tough spot here. So Congress passes the Neutrality Act, and there's several of these acts that fall under the Neutrality Act, but it's the first of several attempts of Congress to really try to keep America at peace. Now, of course, across the board, that's ultimately what you should want. You shouldn't want to have to go to war with anybody, but it's very difficult for us to watch our allies across the ocean dealing with this scenario that's developing in a very quick way on their mainland, and we're not able to do much about it. But again, Congress is trying to do their best to make sure that we are not going to go out of our way to make this an involvement of ours, unless we absolutely have to. We saw that during World War I, right? Not until the Lusitania attack, the Zimmermann telegram, the U-boats, attacking our neutral ships, and we saw the Russian Revolution, all the reasons as to what led us into World War I. Remember, we were neutral in the beginning of World War I, and then events happened that dragged us into it. We're going to see that happen here again eventually, but at the time, in the beginning stages, the Neutrality Act kind of handcuffed FDR and really the United States to help our allies out. The Neutrality Act did not allow the president to sell any weapons, which is what arms are, to give any loans to any countries, or give any assistance whatsoever to any country at war. Again, that's more or less being used to make sure that we do stay out of this conflict. We also had some power around the world, going all the way back to like the Monroe Doctrine from last year, you learned in 7th grade, or even the Roosevelt Corollary, which extended that. We learned about that at the end of trimester 1. All these Latin American countries had a reliance on us. We had an agreement with them to protect them in case any other type of foreign power came in to threaten them. that is something that we had going all the way back, really 50, 60 years, even further than that, going all the way back to the Monroe Doctrine. Well, in order to kind of keep good on their promise to us and then vice versa, we wanted to give full freedom to these Latin American countries just to avoid any ties that we have to them in case they get drawn into the war. We wouldn't have a feel or a need to get involved ourselves. So what we did was anywhere around the world, especially in Latin America or in Central America or in South America or in the islands of the Caribbean, anywhere we had troops, we slowly started to decrease our involvement there to the point where we withdrew our troops. So we had troops in Nicaragua, we had troops in Haiti, just to give you two examples, and we withdrew our connection to them. Just again, to kind of keep ourselves out of maybe an inevitable war we might have to get involved in because of allies. We also talked about the Platt Amendment at the end of the first trimester as it applies to Cuba. We helped build up Cuba's education system. We helped build up Cuba's economy. And that was all under the Platt Amendment. And that's something that we kind of got away from as well. We really just let them be completely isolated, which inevitably is going to be something that leads them to fall to communism in the 1950s. So ironically enough, this actually ends up being a bad thing for Cuba. However, it is a good thing for us just in the grand scheme of being able to be isolated and being taken away from anything that inevitably could come from this and drag us into war. All right, so the last slide for today is just a political cartoon talking about the good neighbor policy, right? So just a little political cartoon about FDR looking over a fence, almost like we're neighbors, right, with the president of Mexico at the time. Remember, kind of cutting our ties and being friendly with them as opposed to really relying on them or vice versa for any type of assistance. Okay, now, that'll be our lesson for today. Now, as far as what we're going to be doing next, so I'm going to attach a worksheet to this, as always, and that's kind of going to be the theme of every day. I'll have a quick video about some of our notes. You jot those notes down. You answer the worksheet in writing, no typing it, but in writing, write down the answers of the worksheet. We'll go over the worksheet in these conferences. Now, the first conference, again, if you're watching this on Monday night, it'll be tomorrow morning. First period, 8:50, second period, 9:35. Just make sure you're logged into the conference at that point. If you're watching this on Tuesday morning, just make sure those times you are logged into those conferences, all right? And that's kind of the theme that we'll go with every day, starting tomorrow, Tuesday, because I'm videotaping this on Monday afternoon. So Tuesday morning will be the first of the conferences that we do, and we will start doing conferences every day at that time just for a few minutes to review what we have done with this lesson the day before. All right, so really every day, just make sure your worksheet is submitted by the beginning of class, and then we'll go over that worksheet in the conferences every day. If you have any questions, just shoot me an email. I'll try to lay this thing out for you in detail in the assignment in writing. But other than that, hope you guys have a great day. Enjoy St. Patrick's Day. Aaron Gobra. Take care.